Hi, I'm Debbie. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to be painting this crashing wave design. I'm going to walk you through every step along the way. I have a list of supplies down below, so grab those and please join me. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. If you hit that subscribe button, there's going to be a little bell that pops up next to that. Hit the bell and you will get notified every time I upload a new video. Okay, so we're going to start off just sketching out with your pencil a wave shape. So you're just going to do a little swoop up, down, and up. This doesn't have to be exactly like this, but something similar. And we're going to just scoop down and go up again. Okay. So for our colors, we've got our cadmium yellow, magenta, primary blue, or brilliant blue, and white. I always use just these basic colors when I'm doing a tutorial because I want to make it as easy as possible for you to mix your colors. So I would highly, highly recommend, I'm working on a color mixing video right now. I'm going to put the link above as soon as I get it finished. And watch that video and practice mixing colors if you're not familiar with mixing colors, especially when you're using acrylic paint, because it's so important to know how to mix the exact color that you want, because acrylic paints dry so fast you're gonna have to go back in and remix your colors a lot. So with oil paints, the colors last way longer. They don't dry, they take forever to dry. So if you mix a color, it's gonna stay wet for quite a while. But with acrylics, you have to be great with mixing your colors. Okay, so we're gonna start off using my 5/8 angular brush, and we're gonna do the background part first. So this is gonna be kind of a bluish green color. Let's start with a scoop of blue, scoop of yellow, and let's just mix that together. We're going to make a little bit of a greenish shade, and let's just see what that looks like. And that's a little bit too turquoisey, so the way we're going to neutralize it, kind of tone it down a little bit, we're going to take a little magenta, and let's mix that in there. And it's still a little too turquoise. We're going to take a little more magenta. And it kind of helps when you spread it out. If you're using one of these palettes, paper palette pads, it's like wax paper. So if you spread, or if you're using a styrofoam white plate, this will work too. Kind of spread it out and you can see the colors in there. If it's too turquoise, once you paint it on there, you can kind of see that it's going to be really turquoise. We don't want to go quite that turquoise. Let's take a little more yellow, a little more magenta. We want to get kind of a deep greenish blue. Let's take a little bit of white. When you add a little bit of white, you can really see what the shade truly is. And that's a little more turquoise than we want. So let's put some more magenta in it. And that's toning it down a bit, because we don't want this part back here to stand out too much. You want that to kind of fade back, because the main focus is going to be on the wave. So that'll be good for now. We're going to do a lot of layers of color, so go ahead and get that on there. This base color isn't that important because we're going to be doing so many layers of color. So you just want to get any color there blocked in, and then we'll add to it gradually. Make sure you paint the edges of your canvas too. If you're using a gallery wrapped canvas like this where the sides will show, you want to paint all the edges. So that is definitely way more turquoisey green than I want. It's beautiful, but that's not really the color I'm going for. So I'm going to take some more blue, just mix it right into that pile. A little bit of white, and let's see what we get. So now it's a little too bright blue. We want to tone it down a little bit. Let's take a little yellow and a little magenta. Okay, now we're going to just add some streaks, keeping these horizontal. We're just getting some more variation in the water. Just lots of streaks. And you want some of those other colors to show through. That's what we're going to do. Lots of layers, so it gives it a lot more depth. Because if you look at the ocean, you see tons of different colors in the water without realizing. You look out there, you just think it's blue, but you'll see hundreds of colors. Okay, let's take a little bit of white, and we're just going to add some streaks of white. We don't want them to stay this white because we want that background to fade out, so we're going to blend this in. But again, keeping it very streaky, horizontal streaks. There can be some short streaks, some long streaks, but keeping it as horizontal as you can. If we were doing very close up, if we wanted this to be more in the foreground, you'd be doing big swells and big curves and waves, but we're not doing that. We want it to be kicked back as if it's way further back, so keep it as horizontal as you can. A little more white. And don't blend it all in so it's solid. You want to see different shades, different colors. And this is still a little too turquoise looking for me, so I'm going to bring in a little more of a grayish, greenish blue. So let's take a little more blue and some yellow. And I'm not even cleaning off my brush, so that way we have a little mix of that and this mixed together. And we're getting more of a greenish tone. Let's put a little magenta to neutralize it, mute it down. Now it's a little too purpley. So I'm going to take a little more yellow. Now we're getting kind of a deep greenish shade. And more yellow. Okay, I see some green in there now. Let's do some streaks of green. I'm just lightly dragging my brush across. So it's kind of feathering that color in to the other colors. I want a lot more of this dark, deep greenish color in here. Okay, we're gonna take some of that. We're gonna take a break from that for a little bit, let it dry a little bit. Take some more of this dark greenish mix that we did. And we're gonna bring a little bit of this down below the curve of the wave. And we're just gonna go up a little bit. And we're just blocking in some color right now. And I want this more of a deeper, darker green. So this is a little too bluish green for me. Let's take a scoop of yellow, big scoop of yellow. Mix it in. Let's take a little bit of dark blue, the primary blue. And a little bit of magenta. Start with just a tiny bit. Can always add more later. So that's really going to darken up that green. That's more like it. Okay. So we're going to do a fat stripe right a little bit under that curve and then across. Just get that color on there. Get your edges, don't forget your edges. And then I'm doing brush strokes coming up like this because we're going to have the water sort of flowing up like this and then it's going to fold over. So I'm applying the brush strokes in the direction that the water is going to be flowing. So this is going to be part of a deeper shade, like the shadow, and then we're going to get lighter and lighter and lighter and then it's going to fold over. And then down here it's going to be lighter because the sky is hitting this surface. So this is like flat here, and then right when it curves up it'll start to get darker. So just take your brush and sort of fling it in the direction of the wave going this way. Now we're going to get a little lighter green, so let's take a little bit of white and we'll just take our dirty brush and a little bit of that dark green we had. Now this is too minty looking, just adding white, so we want a little more yellow brought in. Because the water, when the light's shining through, it's going to have those greens shining through. So that's about good. More of a yellowish green. And we're just going to add, going in the same direction, just where the wet part ends right here, or where that dark green ends, where that wet paint is, we're going to blend right into the bottom edge, or the top edge, sorry, of the dark green. And we're just going to blend. So we're picking up a little bit of that dark green as we're swiping upwards. Do a little bit over here too. And go up, not quite to the top because we're going to go even lighter up there, almost to the top. Get your edges. And then let's make sure this has a little bit better transition. So don't have too much paint on your brush. Wipe off a bunch of it. Wipe off as much as you can. And then just very lightly, you're going to feather your brush just with a light touch. And just dragging it back and forth. It's okay if it's not perfectly smooth and blended. It's actually a little bit better if you have a little bit of dark and a little bit of light mixed in on those two parts, because when you see that wave folding over, you're going to see little things floating in the water, and so seeing those different shades will just add to the realistic feel of it. And we're going to be going back in on this too, so pretty much nothing we're doing on these first layers is going to be the final look that we have, so don't worry too much if it doesn't look exactly like you want it to look. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit lighter, so let's take a little more white and a little more yellow. And notice how I'm kind of working my way this way, so I'm not mixing up the old pile, because you kind of want to be able to go back and remember what colors you mixed, so you can see where you were and how you mixed that shade. That'll help you. Let's put a little more yellow in here. And you can see how we start darker and then we get lighter and lighter. And then let's add a little bit of that lighter right up to that top edge there. And just go right up to the edge for now. Add a little bit on that side. And then again, do that little feathering technique, blending it into that darker shade of green there. Just really light touch, just got to make that sound effect when you do it. It helps. And I want to bring in a little more light and a little more yellow. Take a little more yellow, a little more white, and go really light just along the top edge. Ooh, that's really yellow. That's okay. We'll start with that. We can always go back in. And just want a little bit right along that top part. Fade it down. We're going to be going back in and adding more to this lighter wave also. Okay, I forgot we should have done this while we had the colors. That's okay. Let's start with the lighter, and we're going to add that lighter color. Oops, got some dark on my brush. That's okay. Add that lighter color right along that top edge. It's okay, we got some of that dark in there, or I did. Hopefully you didn't, but no big deal. It's acrylic paint, so when it dries we could just paint right over it. Or just blend it. Looks like it's going to blend in just fine. So we'll do opposite. We'll work lighter to darker. Now I'll take a little bit of that next green. Just kind of rub it into... So don't leave a little bit of space. Don't go all the way down to this edge. Just leave a little bit of space showing so we'll know where that wave's going to go. And again, just feather back and forth. Now for this direction, so this water's going up like this, but then this is going to curve and come over. So doing your brush strokes in this direction is what you want to do for this part of the wave. And let's bring in some of that darker, just a little bit of that darker along this edge. Because the paint's wet, it's blending in and getting it a little bit lighter than we want, but that's okay. So we'll go back in afterwards and darken it up if we want. And just lightly feather it up. And again, if you use your brush very lightly and just kind of fling it up, you'll get these nice streaks and it'll look like the water's flowing over. So I'm just lightly flicking my brush up and you're getting all these little lines. So you want to let your brushes do the work for you if you can. And now I'm holding my brush so the pointy part of the brush is down and just using that tip of the brush to create a few extra streaks. Going again in this direction. And again, we're going to be going back in, adding a lot more detail to all the parts. And you can see the canvas showing through the dark green here. You don't want that canvas showing through, so we're going to go in and do another layer of that dark color. I'm going to clean off my brush and dry it off so it's not too wet. If your brush is too wet, then you're going to have really see-through paint. It's going to be very transparent. We don't want that. We want it a little bit thicker. So we're going to probably need to mix more of this dark green color because I am just about out of it right here. Yeah, let's mix some more. So let's take a scoop of blue and a scoop of yellow So more blue than yellow. And then a little bit of that magenta to darken it up and mute it down. That is really dark. That's a little too dark. Let's take some more yellow. And that might be good there. Let's just bring a little bit of that. It's even a little darker. And it's going to look a little bit darker when you paint on top of the layer. Because here the paint was, that canvas was showing through, so it looks lighter. So let's just do another layer that dark right on top of there. Right into the wave. And a lot of this detail along the edge is going to get all covered up when we do the big splashing wave, so don't worry about that. Bring some more, a little more dark up into the wave. Again, keeping your brush strokes in this direction. And now the problem is this is dry, so it's not going to blend in there, and that's the thing with acrylics. A lot of people hate that about acrylics, that they dry so fast. If this was oil paints, this would be wet, and so you could keep blending, but acrylics are, I like them because they do dry fast, but when you're trying to blend, that's when it gets a little frustrating. But that's okay, let's just take a little, this is why it's important to know how to mix your colors really well. We're going to mix up a little more of that lighter green shade. So we're going to take a scoop of yellow and just a little bit of white. Take a little bit of that dark green, mix it in there, and then we're going to do a little bit of that next shade of green. And actually this time I went a little more yellow, but I like it. And if you want to just dip your brush in the water, just a teeny little dip, just to get a little bit wet. You don't want it really wet because then it's going to drip. You don't want it to drip. But adding a little bit of water will help you blend a little better. Okay, let's do that. Just flicking it up in that direction we talked about. A little bit over here. Tiny bit of water. You can also use a glazing medium, which is great for when you're drying or when you're blending into a dry paint, just like we were doing right there. The glazing medium, it will make your paint a little bit more transparent and flow better, so you can go right on top of the medium green and it'll be sort of see-through in parts, so you can, it's just easier to blend it. We might pull some of that out later. I'm not sure yet. And you can learn about that on, I have a video where I talk about, it's a 2-minute tip video, so it's a really quick video, and I explain how to blend acrylics. So it'd be a good idea to watch that if you're unfamiliar with it. And there is an explanation of the glazing medium, and I do a little sample. So I'll put a link up above. You can click on that and watch that. It's really helpful. Okay, so now we need to do the lighter color. So that you might have a little bit of that wet paint on your palette still. Do the next shade lighter, and we're just going to go right along this edge and blend it in. And this actually, it doesn't bother me. This is a little bit dry because some of this, I barely have any paint on my brush, and a little bit of this dry brush running on top of that green, the medium green, will actually add a lot of cool detail, and it'll start to give your wave a lot of depth and look like there's things floating in there, and a couple shades of that lighter green mixed in. See how it's kind of patchy looking? That'll be cool. And let's take a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow. A little more yellow. And add just a little bit along that top part. You want the very lightest part to really look like the sun's shining right through there. You can just do little smudges here and there along the top to give it a look like there's stuff floating in there and shining through. Okay, we'll be going back in there again. I'm sure of it. Let's add, get your brush a little bit wet and put some of that light yellow white and yellow. Now I'm having my brush a little more wet here, and I'm wiping off most of the paint. So I'm just barely have any watered down paint on my brush, just barely any. And I'm gonna hold my brush so the pointy part of my brush is facing to the left. And we're gonna come along the top here, and we're just gonna fling. You're gonna curve your brush. We're going in this direction, kind of curving over, so it looks like that water's just cascading over. And very lightly, I'm just flinging my brush down a little bit from the top. See how I'm just kind of flicking it? So go along the top edge and then fling it down. I'm curving it while I'm doing it. I'm just doing it fast so it gets this pointy, wispy edge to it. A little more paint on my brush. And you want this nice and light. And have it come down about halfway in some points. You just want those little pointy parts. And then again, after you do it with the brush flat, use the pointy part of the brush and you can do a few longer streaks just to get some of those feeling of the wave really crashing forward, like it's see-through, like you can see right into it. All right, we'll be going back into that later too, adding another layer of a lighter shade of that. Okay, let's work down here now. So we're gonna let's take a little bit of that dark green again and add a little bit down along the bottom. And it's just a thin layer of it. It's kind of watered down. A little more water on my brush. Take some of that. Let's also take a little, hopefully you have some of this, that bluish color we made. It's kind of a grayish French blue look. Let's add some of that down here too. And I have it thinned out. It's got a bunch of water mixed in, so it's gonna flow across the canvas a little easier. Yours can be thick, it doesn't matter. This doesn't have to be thinned out, but that's what mine's got going on right now. We're gonna do a lot of layers of color down here. We're starting with some of the dark green and some of the bluish gray color. Get your bottom. Okay, so now we're going to take a little more of that bluish gray color that we made. And let's just add a little bit of that. Streaking that into some of that dark green. Keep it streaky. And take a little more of that dark green, and we're going to start to curve it up a little bit, like in this direction. So this is going to be flat, and then it's going to curve up, curve up. Dark green. Okay, we're going to go back up to the top. You don't even have to clean off your brush. We're going to take a little bit of white, mix it into some of that blue if you still have it. Let's just go ahead and make a little more in case yours ran out. Take a scoop of white, a little bit of blue, a little bit of magenta. Let's mix that up. And let's take a little bit of yellow. So we're going for a lighter version of this darker blue color, but we don't want it to be too bright. So right now this is a very turquoisey blue, so let's take a little more magenta and a little more yellow. And that is nowhere near the color we want, but it's kind of a muted down grayish mauve color, which will be a good start. Take a little more blue. Whenever you mix all three colors, that's gonna tone it down, kind of gray it up a little bit, so it won't be so bright. And since that's in the distance, that's what we want to do. Okay, let's take a little more blue. Now we're getting closer. So this is kind of a grayish blue color. Let's check that out. That'll be good. Okay, so I'm gonna wash off my brush because I have so much paint on it right now. Get a fresh, clean start. Nice clean brush, and then with just a little bit of water on your brush, you're gonna mix a little bit of water into that color, and we're just gonna, again, doing horizontal streaks. And you want this watered down a little bit so that way it's not gonna get too bright. It's gonna tone it down a little bit. It's a very thin layer of paint, and we're just gonna add streaks, long and short streaks, keeping them horizontal. Just kind of spread out all over. Because you want some of these dark tones to still show through. You don't want to cover all of that dark base up. You just want to add streaks of some lighter. And again, by adding the water, it's not going to get too bright. It's very watered down. And I'm using kind of the flat side of my brush sometimes. That gives it a little more texture. You don't want it to look like perfect stripes. You don't want perfect lines. So we're doing some skinny lines, some flatter parts of the brush. So you're getting a lot more layers and dimension back there. And I'm fading it in, so I'm kind of blending it together because I don't want it to look too textury, otherwise it's going to draw too much attention to it. So we want it kind of subtle and blended. And if it's wet enough, now you can go over it and blend it in a little bit. Adding a little more water. And if we get too many streaks and it's too busy, we'll just go back in. We'll add a little more of the dark. It's okay. So don't freak out if it's not looking just like mine. Hopefully it's looking better. That's cool. If you do a better version than I'm doing, that's great. I would love to see pictures. I love when people send me pictures of their tutorials that they've done. Okay. So right now, I want it a little more blended. I'm gonna take a little more of this. Be careful getting up to that edge of your wave there. I'm gonna do some more layers so it's not so many darks and lights standing out so much. I want little bits of the dark showing through, but not such a contrast. We're getting there. Can you hear my dog snoring in the background? That's Poet. Holy cow, you're loud this morning. He's very lazy. He pretty much sleeps all day. It's very funny. You're so loud over there. Okay. This is looking pretty good. I think I want to bring in a little bit of the green though. just take a tiny bit of some of your green, the dark green if you have it. I'm watering it down a little bit. I'm just gonna, here and there, add a few streaks of that, but you want it to blend in. You don't want it to stand out. Right now it's really standing out because I used kind of a brighter green, which I wanted to find the dark green, but I don't have any left on my palette here, so that's okay. I'm just gonna blend in a few little bits here and there. Actually, I'm gonna make the darker green. This one's a little too bright. So I'm taking some magenta, some blue, and some yellow. Again, same mix we did before. The dark green. There's a dark. And just where some of those darker spots are, I'm gonna take a little bit. We're gonna blend it in though, don't leave it big dark spots like that. Just tap a few areas. Clean off my brush. I'm drying my brush off, and then so my brush is just a little bit damp, and I'm just gonna drag my brush over the wet spots of green paint. Just because I want to tie in a little bit of that green since we have so much green here. Just a little bit. Here and there. I'm just doing a very thin, watered down green shade. Just having water fling off my brush. Bring some here. More of that dark green. The more layers of color you have back here, the more depth it's going to have, and the more realistic it's going to get. You don't want to just have blue and a light blue. That would look very amateur. That's why we've got some green in there, some dark blue in there, some grayish blue. But you also don't want the colors to be too many different variations of brightness. They're all right now very much in the same range of tone. So if you squint your eyes, you're not going to see a huge contrast. If you look at your painting right now, squint your eyes, you're going to see major contrast between the white and the green. You don't want to see that back there because that's supposed to be in the distance further back. You're not supposed to really notice a whole lot of detail back there. And that's why by keeping all those colors in the same muted tone, that's going to help kick it back. It's going to give it lots of depth when you look closely, but it's not going to stand out from afar. Okay, so I'm going to get my brush wet again. I'm going to take a little more of that lighter color we did, that light French grayish blue color, and I'm going to go back over and add a few more bits of that here and there. Since we did some of that green, I'm going to go back in with this afterwards. Go over some of those green areas. Adding little bits here and there. Again, keep these streaks pretty flat and horizontal, not wavy and curvy. And then every once in a while, step back, take a look at it. It's always good to step back often because you get so busy and you're up close on your painting. I've done that before where I'm painting for like 4 hours straight and I forget to step back and look at something. And when I do finally step back and look, there's certain parts that are so obvious that I didn't catch when I was up close on it. So you need to step back, it's really important. And you'll notice way more imperfections and things you want to fix early on, which is better than after 4 hours of deep into it. So these, again, these lighter grayish blue tones that we're adding. These are just going to help kick it back. Send it into the distance and add another layer of color. And okay, I think that's good for now. We can always go back into it later. Clean off your brush. And actually, you don't need to clean off your brush. We're going to use that same color. Water it down if you didn't already. I'm starting to run out of it, but I'll try to get what I can out of there. So again, you want this to be very watered down. And we're going to come down here. We're going to add some of that sea foam stuff that you see at the base of the shoreline. And I'm holding my brush with that pointy part facing in to the left again. And I'm holding my brush kind of flat, right along, flat against the canvas, using like this edge, this edge of the brush. Holding it flat, and I'm gonna do some swervy, how do I describe this? Like flat, streaky lines that are very watered down. I'm going horizontal, but also a little bit of curve. You're going to do some of these. Picture like an oval stretched out. If you were to look straight down on the water, you might see some like kind of circular oval patterns, but we're looking at it at an angle, so it's going to be very flattened out. And so it's like if this was a circle kind of stretched out, you want some of that going on. We don't want it to look too shapy and obvious that we're making big circle patterns. Just gonna keep it really loose. And you're gonna do streaks along the bottom. Some fat, some skinny. Just sort of not being too worried about it. And by using the flat part of the brush, you won't be so concerned with making these perfect little lines. It's gonna kind of do what it's gonna do. Just adding streaks along the bottom. We're going to do a lot of layers of this, so don't worry too much on this first round. Just dragging my brush across horizontally. You don't want to go up yet. You want to keep this very flat. And you want it to, the reason why I added quite a bit of water to it is you want some parts of the paint to stand out a little more, some to be a little more faded out, and by having that water in there, as you're dragging it out, it's going to lighten up in parts, it's going to be a little bit thicker paint in other parts. That's going to give more variation and interest. Now we're going to start to curve it up a little bit. So let's take a little more of that color. And I'm going to take my brush and I'm just going to lightly go up like this. Up. And then you can do a little bit of veining. And again, keep this fairly watered down, so you want this to be really subtle. So with the veining, take the tip of my brush, sort of create just like veins, like a little branch growing off the other one. We don't want this to be too bright because we want it to be kind of faded back. Later on we're gonna just see a hint of it. It's not gonna be a strong detail. So and watering it down is gonna help. Also, if it's watered down, you're not gonna be so committed to it. So if you don't like what you did, once it dries, if it's very watered down, it's going to sort of disappear into the painting a little bit. So I just created a little bit of a circular shape there. And you can connect some of these veins to each other. You don't want to do too much of this. We want to keep this kind of subtle. But just make sure it's curving. It's going to make it more. And then I'm kind of creating like one of those open ovals, sort of spreading open as this curves up. Look at pictures of the ocean water when it hits the shore. If you're not really understanding what I'm saying, because I'm not describing it very well, look at some pictures of the foam that hits the shore. Or go to the beach and really observe it, and you'll see these shapes that get made. And that'll help. I always have pictures of photos next to me when I'm painting so I can have good reference. It's really important to have good reference when you're painting. You want to, even if you're not doing a realistic painting, you want to use a real photo. You want to see exactly what the ocean's doing and see how it reacts when the waves are coming in, and how the light of the sky affects it, and how that foam hits the shore and the shapes it makes. That's going to help you. Don't fake it ever. You can tell a painting when somebody didn't use real reference most times. Because when people try to fake it, it just doesn't look as real. You might think you know, but sometimes you're surprised by how things actually look. Alright, I think that's good for now. So it should be very subtle because we thinned it out and we used a shade of this French gray that was just a little bit lighter than the base color. It's going to keep it subtle. We're going to go back in and brighten up some of the areas now. Okay, and we don't want to bring that all the way up. We just kind of want it to fade and it just sort of disappears. Now let's take a little bit of white and mix it into that French gray blue that we had, and I just ran out, so I gotta make some more. So I'm gonna take a little bit of blue, a little bit of, tiny bit of yellow, a little bit of magenta, and that's way too much blue. Take a little more magenta. A little more yellow. Okay, let's mix it into that white and see. When you add the white, then you can really see if you're at the right shade or not. Let's take some more white. And that's very bright. See, when we add the white, you can see how bright that blue is. So let's tone it down a little bit. Let's mix the rest of this in there. Still a little too blue. Let's take a little bit of yellow. Okay, so I think we're at that. We're pretty much at that gray, French gray kind of color. Now we'll take more white. Add some more white. We just want to go a little bit lighter than what we had last time. Okay. Now I have way too much paint on my brush. It's going to be way too thick if I paint with that. So I'm going to clean off my brush. And with that wet brush, mix that water into your lighter gray. So we thin it out again. It's very thin. You don't want it too much water where it's going to drip. See how that's really wet? It's going to start to drip. So mix a little bit more paint in there if it's too wet. But we do want it fairly wet and thinned out. Okay, so we're going to just go over the same thing we did before. We're just going to do another layer, just a little bit lighter than the last time. And this is going to start to create a lot more layer and depth to this part. Doing the same technique, just kind of keeping it loose, dragging your brush across, creating that foamy look. Keeping it very horizontal. Horizontal? Horizontal. 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 Hori. I don't know. I can't talk sometimes. Okay, so just doing another layer with the lighter and then blow it up a little bit. keep this very subtle. You don't need to go over everything. If you can't see your first layer of that foamy stuff going up, then you can add a little bit with this. But if it's really bright already, don't do too much. Let's just keep it very subtle at first. We might go back in later and brighten up some parts, but for now we're just gonna leave it very subtle. Curving up a little bit there. You can just tap a little bit here and there on some parts. Okay. Now we're going to add a little more white to that mix. Again, keeping it watered down. And we're going to do it again with a little bit brighter. We don't want to go bright white. You never want to go pure bright white until the very last step. Right now this might look white, but it's not. You can see here it's very blue. I'll put some white next to this. There's white, you can see the difference. So in the end, this is going to be, it won't look bright white. Right now it looks pretty white, but trust me, it's not. And then again, by using this edge of my brush, I'm getting a lot of texture here. And that's cool, that's going to add a lot of cool detail. It's kind of like using a palette knife. Getting texture that you don't really plan out, just kind of pops in there and you don't have complete control over it, but it looks cool. See, and you can have some thicker areas pop in here and there. If you go to the beach, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see some areas are going to be really thick, some are going to be little drizzles of that foamy stuff. Be patient with this, it takes time. And if you mess up, don't worry, it should be light enough and subtle enough that when you do another layer, you won't even really see this part. This is just one thin layer. And if you hate it all, you can paint right over it and start over. That's okay. I do that all the time. No shame in starting over. But I encourage you not to start over, because you can probably add to it and fix it. In most cases, that's what you can do. Alrighty, I think that's about good for now. And now, because this is a little bit brighter, we don't want to bring that brighter color up in here anymore, because we're going to keep this in shadow. So I think that's pretty good for now. Alright, I'm going to add a little more water to my brush, and I'm going to add a little more white. We're going to go one shade lighter. And then with each layer that you're doing this, do less and less of this each time. So the first layer, you want to have the most of those little shapes and smudges all over. When you go the next shade lighter, you'll do a little bit less. Then you go lighter, a little less, and now we're going to go even lighter. And this is just going to be hitting a few areas. So it looks like the sun is just kind of hitting a few spots here and there. Same technique, just going to do a little bit less than we had before. Keep it kind of squiggly. And don't compare yours to mine. They're all gonna, if I redid this whole painting, mine will look different too, because you can't really get this exactly the same each time. And that's okay. Keep it loose. Alright, let's see, add a little more on that side. Maybe a little more down here. Little hair. Okay, I think that's good for now. Clean off your brush. Let's go back into this. Add a little more of that lighter, that technique we did here. We're gonna go a little lighter now. So let's take a little bit of white. And let's take a teeny bit of yellow. Teeny bit. So it's mostly white, it's just gonna be a warm white, just a tiny bit of yellow. And water this down. Again, you want this pretty thin and watered. Holding the pointy part of the brush to the left. Start at the top. Let's wipe off more of that paint. You want barely any paint on your brush because you want the bristles of the brush to really work for you. Okay, so light touch, and you're just gonna fling it down, going in this direction. Just along the top. So we went further down that last time with these lighter shades coming down. Now we're gonna go not quite as far down. So you're gonna start to see layers building on top of each other. Fling it, go along the top edge, fling it down, flick your wrist. Again, you don't want it too watery. This just takes a little practice of exactly how much water you're gonna have in it, because you want it to be enough water where it's gonna flow easily for you. If it's too thick, you're not gonna get this streaky look with your brush. That's why the water really helps to thin it out and get you that streaky look. And then again, you can use the pointy part of the brush and add a few little skinny streaks here and there. Have it come down a little further. Okay, actually I'm gonna go a little further down. Further, a little further. If it's thin enough, you'll still see some of these other streaks coming down. Bring a little bit of that same color, very thin and watered down, right up here. Let's brighten this up a little more. I'm doing it very subtle, just a little bit right towards the top, and then I'm just gonna kind of pat in that color, that lighter color a little bit. I'm gonna dry my brush off. So wipe your brush off on paper towel or towel, whatever you have. Very dry brush, and I'm just gonna kind of smash, blending in that little bit of color that we added. Just kind of adding some texture. Just smashing a little bit. Just sort of blend it into that second shade of green we have there. Get that blended in nice. All right, let's water down your brush a little. Take a little bit of that yellow. And I'm thinning it out so it's very, very thin. I'm going to take a little bit of that very thinned out yellow and spreading it down a little further. I want a little more of this light color coming down the wave. I did a little too much, so I'm going to wash off my brush. Dry your brush off really, really well. Really, really well. And then I'm just going to, if you went down too far like I did, just going to blend that in. Because this is all dry, having a slightly wet brush shouldn't affect it. If it's wet at all, it's going to wipe it away. We don't want that. And just blending that in a little. Oh, now it's starting to lift up, so that can be an issue. It's starting to pull up some of the other paint. So I'm going to take a little more of that yellow and drag a little bit of that in there. I'm going to leave that alone because it's starting to lift up some of that paint. Now I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to take a little bit of that really thinned out, watered down yellow. So it's very translucent. And I'm going to add a little bit of streaks of yellow. Just very thin layers. Just blend it right on top. Very, very thin, watered down. Oops, I got some white in there. It's okay. Little bits. This is just going to add a little sunshine peeking through there. That's okay, I actually tapped a little bit of that white. I like what that's doing there. Sometimes you make little mistakes and they're happy little mistakes. And they end up working out really well. Okay. Spread that in. All right, let's clean off your brush. Now we're gonna add some of these waves crashing. All right, so for the waves, you would think it's just white paint, white caps, but it's not. We're gonna mix kind of a bluish lavender shade. So we're gonna take a big scoop of white, take a little bit of blue and a tiny bit of magenta. Just mixing that to the side at first. Okay, now I'm gonna scoop that white in there. And we have kind of a light blue shade. Let's put a little more blue. Let's see. Tiny more blue. So we want the shadow of the wave to be the first part that we do. And then we're going to build up lighter and lighter onto that. Let's see what we got. I think that'll work. So it's kind of a light blue. There's a tiny bit of magenta in there. Use a brush that is not a nice, new, good one. Take your messed up brush for this part because we're really going to mess some things up here. So I probably needed to mix more of that, but that's okay. I'll mix more later. So you just want to smash your brush around. And we're going to smash right along that line that we have there where the wave's going to be. So for starters, just go right along that edge. Just smashing your brush. You want the bristles of the brush to be kind of wacky and crazy, so they'll make a nice textured effect. Now up here, keep this really skinny. So you're just going to tap your brush really lightly, because we want it to be very thin and then it's going to get bigger as it folds over. I need to make more of that. Make a big pile of this because we're going to need quite a bit. So again, big scoop of white, little blue, tiny bit of magenta. Need more white in that. Yeah, that's even better. Okay, so smash. And you don't want too much paint on your brush because you're not going to get those bristles of your brush sticking out if there's too much paint on your brush. So make sure you have barely any paint on your brush because you want to get all that cool texture. And you can have some parts kind of sticking out lower, some parts popping up a little higher. Start subtle and we can grow it bigger, but start kind of small, like meaning this kind of small. And then let's get this part, let's use just a tip of the brush, make this kind of skinny. We don't want this to be too thick. I should have painted the green further up there. Make a little more of this green real quick. And go right up underneath there. So this is nice and skinny. Okay. Okay, then it's going to get a little fuller. And you're just smashing. Smash your brush and then smash it on your canvas. Get it very textury. Then I like to, rather than, you don't want to keep it all perfect and contained, maybe have a splash coming up here. Maybe there's another splash kind of popping up over there. You want little random parts flinging up. You could maybe have this shoot up higher. But use the very tip of the brush, so you want to make sure when you're smashing your brush, see the bristles? See how they're kind of wacky looking? That's perfect. You want those little ends, so just lightly touch on the canvas and you'll get that texture. See how I'm just barely tapping, and then you're going to get more of that texture. So you want little tiny bits because you want little pieces of water flying. So really lightly tap. Over here I was doing it hardcore, smashing it, because it's going to be a little thicker. But when you want those little bits of water kind of doing their own thing, you just want little taps, very, very light taps. And again, yours is going to look different than mine. That's okay. Just kind of depends where you smash your brush down. And every once in a while, just step back, take a look. Don't go too crazy at first because it's going to be really hard to erase this. If you do mess up and you want to wipe it away, you need to make sure this is really dry on the background first. So you can take a wet brush and you're just going to rub it and scoop it away with a wet, barely wet brush, just a damp, barely wet brush. You can wipe it away while it's still a little bit wet, but it's also going to wipe away your background if it's not really, really, really dry. So take your time with this, because if you go too far, too much, it'll just make your wave look bigger, but if you do something you're not liking, then it's really hard to go back and fix it. So just work on this slowly. Do some smudges, step back, and decide if you want to make it bigger, maybe a bigger poof right here. Maybe have that come up higher. Have this come up a little more. Make that a little more solid there. Let this come lower. So you want the center section to be pretty solid. You don't want to see that, the ocean coming through, because this is going to be like a big, thick wave crashing down. So do this pretty solid. We're going to do the next layer now. I think that's pretty good for starter. So this is your base, and then we're going to get a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter as we add more texture and depth to this. Let's see, I think I like that. Yeah, okay. So now, I need more white paint. Hold on a second. So now you're going to add a little more white. We're going to do a lighter shade of this. You can just mix it right into a little section of that. We're going to get a little bit lighter now. Smash your brush. And now we're going to think about where the light is. So I'm going to picture the light being the upper right corner here. So you want the light hitting on the edges. So we're going to go with that a little bit next lighter shade. And I'm going to hit like the right side the right and the top side. You're just gonna smash. Make sure when you're doing this texture, your brush isn't making the exact same pattern. You know, like back in the 80s when people were doing sponge painting on their walls and you'd see the sponge pattern repeated, repeated, repeated. You don't want that look. You don't want it to look like a fake amateur sponge painted bathroom. You want to turn your brush different directions. So if I was to go like this, boom, 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 it's the exact same pattern. But if I turn my brush different directions, I'm going to get different patterns of the brush. You don't want it to be obvious that we used a brush for this. So we're going to add little bits all around, keeping it darker on the bottom edge, because that's where the shadow is, the bottom part. But you're just basically doing the same technique. Kind of picture, maybe look at pictures of waves too. Picture when a wave's crashing, there's like little groups almost, kind of like a bush. So if you were to do some lighter areas on this side, this would be where the light's hitting it, and then there'd be shadow on that side. Maybe you have another little group of the wave, little wave bush. Here might be a little group, a little section of bumpiness. I'm not describing that very well, am I? Again, keeping that light touch. I need to make a little more of that. Light touch. Smash, and then texture. In this stage, kind of like how down here, the first darker shade, you're gonna have most of that. Then when you do the next lighter shade, you're gonna do a little bit less. And you're just adding texture. You don't want it to grow too much bigger. Keep it in the same area where you did that first layer, but we're just adding little bits of lighter texture. Keep it real subtle here. You don't want it to get too thick. Just kind of adding a little more texture all over. You can do a little bit down here, but don't cover up all that dark area. You want some areas to be a little bit lighter. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit lighter. Take a little more white. Not pure white yet. We're going to do very light, but not pure white. So you have that shade, going a little lighter, and now a little lighter. Smash it up. Smash it, smash it, smash it. And we're just going to do, you might have too much paint on your brush. You might need to clean it off and start fresh. Dry it off first though. And just little bits of this. We're going to do fewer of, or less of this than with that second shade we did. And now you want to add more to the tips and the tops where the light would be hitting it. Who was that? My daughter's texting me. Okay, go into our friends. Okay, just little bits along this top edge here because the light's going to be hitting it this way. Be real subtle, don't get too thick here. Little bits. See how I'm not doing it everywhere, I'm just sort of creating some little sections where I'm getting a little brighter on the edges. So you're starting to see some shape form. There's like little groups of water bushes. Let's get on the side there. Okay. Now you can do a little bit with this color. Smash it up really well. And we're going to pop up a little bit here and there. Just little tiny bits of texture. Smash that brush so it looks like the water's flying up a little here and there. I don't like how that texture was looking. Smash your brush and lightly tap. Get my brush right here. Test out your brush. Make sure it's making a cool pattern that you like. Okay, I'm gonna have little bits pop in here. So now, if you do a few down here, it's really gonna stand out because this dark background. And just be real subtle with this. You don't want this to be too crazy. But you just want like little spray of water popping out here and there. Again, keep it subtle. You can always add more later. Let's do a few up here. Okay, that's good for now, because we're going to do the same thing with some pure white in a minute. Okay, I said that's good, and then I keep going. Yes, that's what I'll do. Okay, I think I'm done. Not yet. A little more here. A little more here. A little more there. Okay, clean off your brush when you're happy with that. Clean it off really, really, really well because we're going to do the white now. So you want your brush very clean. And dry it off because you want your brush to be completely dry for this part. Because if it's not dry and you dip it in the white and we do the technique that we're doing, the same texturing technique, if your brush is wet at all, it's going to thin out that white and the white's not going to be pure bright white. So you want it to be nice and bright white. Okay, so very dry brush, dip it in your white and then smash your brush so you get that textury lip. Oops, just threw some white paint on my toe. Okay, so smashing it down. Now we're going to do the brightest part of the wave. So again, picture where the light's hitting. The light's going to hit the edges, just the tips and the edges. So you're just going to smash a little bit on. Start very subtle, don't do too much white. Smash your brush and we're just going to do little bits. See how that really stands out? And you don't want too much of this because you want this to really be special and stand out. If you do it everywhere, then it's not going to seem special. So take your time just kind of spreading it around in different areas to start with. And you want it to be right on the edge, not in the middle. I mean, some of it will be in the middle, but right on the very edge, so it looks like the lightest part is being hit by the sun. The lightest, the edges are the lightest part being hit by the sun. Now because the paint is a little bit wet still, the white is going to blend in a little bit. But that's okay because we're going to do another layer if it's too blended. I'm just kind of fading that down into the lighter shade. When you start to run out of paint on your brush, you can just tap it down further and it'll blend into that medium shade. And I'm going to do a few little taps down here so it looks like it's the spray. That was a little too much. Smash your brush. Barely any paint on your brush. A few little taps. Again, just like we did these little sprays here, do a little bit of that with the white around here and there. Change the pattern of your bristles, smash your brush up. Stand back, take a look, make sure you're heading in the right direction. I feel like it's too textury, my personal preference, so I'm gonna smash my brush around and not do so much texture. I feel like it's so textury. I want it a little bit softer. So I'm gonna blend in a little bit and not have so much texture yet. I'm just smearing my brush around to sort of blend it up. Make it a little softer. And you know what else? I want another shade. I want to bring in a little bit more of a purpley shade into this darker. So that's okay. Sometimes you change your mind after you've already gone a few steps ahead. So let's take that same blue color that we started, but I'm going to take a little bit of magenta and mix it into that. So the same colors, blue with a little more magenta and white. So we're going to make more of a periwinkle kind of a shade instead of so blue. And let's add a little more white to that. It's subtle, it's just a little bit more of a lavender periwinkle shade. And I'm going to just sort of tap that into the darker areas. Just lightly tap. It's good to have a couple different shades so it's not all, it's going to give it a lot more depth having that bluish tone and then a little bit of this periwinkle. Put a little bit over there too. And we'll add more of the light layers on top of this. And I'm smashing it around a little bit too. I'm pouncing on it, but then I'm also sort of doing a little bit of a smeary blend so it's a little softer. And I'm tapping. A little combo. Tap, smudge technique. Okay, yeah, I'm liking that better already. This is just gonna, the more layers you add, the better it's gonna get. So don't look at it like, oh, I messed up and I have to redo things. It's actually gonna end up being much better. So if you get real far on a painting and then you hate what you did and go back into it and start over certain parts, it's probably going to end up looking even cooler because you'll be able to see some of those other colors coming through underneath that you might not have planned on doing, but it ends up being even better. Okay, I'm smudging that around a little bit. See how that's a little more soft and blended, but you can still see that texture coming through, so it actually worked out better. Because we had so much of that white texture and now you can kind of see it coming through. So when this layer that I'm doing, I'm not doing it really solid. There's barely any paint on my brush. And that's adding to it. And this is just kind of smudging here. It's kind of creating a misty look. Because I barely have any paint on my brush. So that's kind of creating a little haze and mist, which is cool. I wasn't even planning on doing that, but now I like it. Okay, I'm already liking that better. Light taps, texture here and there. Okay, I'm adding a little more white now to the lighter areas where the light's hitting. Less of this, less each time you get lighter. And keeping it a little darker along the bottom edges where the shadow of the waves are. A little more white. And even though I have pure white, it's blending into it a little bit because the paint's wet, and that's okay. Just adding even more depth by tapping into the slightly wet paint. It's going to blend in with it naturally, but create more depth too. I'm kind of smudging it also again, so it's a little softer. And again, don't just do it everywhere because then it's all going to become one big shape. See how I'm kind of doing like little sections so that you see some of those darker parts in there and some lighter parts, so you have lots of shape to it. Because you want to see some of those different shades within little sections. Okay, more white. Now I'm going to lightly tap with the pure white. So I'm not smudging it anymore. Just going to tap so you get those really bright spots. And you don't want a ton of them. You want those to be special. So it looks like the sun's really hitting some of those really bright sections. Do a few little bright smudges and then stand back and you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll really see that you want to keep these subtle. You don't want to do this everywhere. Your painting will thank you for it later. Okay, take a little break from that for a second. Clean off my brush. And now you're going to use, I'm going to use a nice brush, the 5/8 angular brush. I'm going to use one that's not all beat up. And I'm going to use the very tip of the brush. You could also use, if you're worried about using that big brush, you could use this little tiny number 2 round brush. But I'm going to use just the very tip of the brush, put a little bit of white, and I'm going to do just a teeny bit of white, not much, just little bits right along the edge. Not like a solid line, just some little smudges. Not even on the whole thing, just a little bit right on the edge. And maybe have it dip down just a teeny bit. Oh, you're so loud over there with your snoring. Jeez Louise. Okay, just a little bit there. I'm going to add a little more of that white. See how this faded back so much you can barely see it? See, I ran out of white paint. Let me get a little more on my palette. Okay, so take your 5/8 the angled brush, and you're going to water it down a little bit. Put some white on your brush and wipe off most of the paint. So you want it very thinned out, but not too watery. You don't want it drippy. And we're going to do that same little flinging technique. I've got too much paint on my brush. I'm going to wipe off the extra. Actually, it was too much water. It was so much water that it was just coming out solid. You gotta just find the right mix. So a very light touch, and just a little bit, you're just gonna fling it. Make sure it's curving a little bit. Right along that very top edge. And you can use the pointy part again and just do a few little streaks coming down. Make sure it's slightly curving. Wipe it off my brush, too much paint on it. A little more white right along that top edge. You don't want it too white. I got a little too white there. I'm gonna clean off my brush and dry it off. You want the brightest white to be the edges of the waves there. I'm just cleaning up a little bit of that edge. I came up a little bit above, so I'm just taking a damp brush. I'm just slightly wiping away those little smudges that jumped over the wave. Now I'm just gonna drag this out a little bit. Just spreading out what I did. Streaking it. It's gonna tone down the white a little bit too by just sort of dragging it out. But it won't probably dry bright white, because if you watered it down, it's not gonna be the pure bright white that you have on your waves. Okay, I think I like that. Maybe a little more right here. Okay, and okay. Now we're going to add some little sparkles in the water. So you can take your little tiny brush, your 2-inch round brush, and you can either use just the tip of it, and we're going to do some little tiny dots, just here and there. You don't want to go too crazy, but these are going to be like little sparkles of the sun. Who's calling me? No thanks. Okay, or you can use the bottom end of your brush, the wrong end of your brush, and you can tap the bottom end, and you can just lightly do little taps with the end of your brush if you're not comfortable using this end. I'm going to use the right end, but little tiny dots, little sparkles. You can do little groups of them here and there. Some can be closer together. Don't go too crazy, just start off kind of subtle. You just want little tiny taps. Just kind of spread them around randomly. Like on where the water is. You do some on the foam, it'll appear like they're maybe little bubbles or things like that. These are just like little sparkles from the sun. Just do a few and then stand back and look at it. And then you can add more if you need to. And you can do a few of these around your wave too. These will just look like little splashes of water. So I didn't like that, so I'm going to take a damp brush and just going to spread it out and blend it into the background. Just want one right there. Step back, take a look. Okay. Do a couple right there. I'm going to do a little more with that textury brush. I'm just going to do a little more spray. And this is all just personal preference where you want to have little bits added. Okay. Got a little bright. Okay, I think we're almost there. Add a little more. I'm just using a dry brush, a little bit of white on it, and I'm just smudging in little bits into this lighter section. Barely, barely, barely any paint on my brush. I'm just using the side of my brush. I'm just blending, smudging in a little bit of texture. Blending there, and just little smudges. Just want to see something going on in there. It looked too plain to me. Okay, very subtle, but all right. So now, what I always like to do when I think I'm close to being done, I like to, you know what? Wait, I'm not done. I'm gonna add a little more of this. Right now, this looks like it still needs a little bit of something. So I'm going to take some of this dark green and make a little more of that. So let's take a little bit of yellow, a little bit of dark blue, or the blue, only blue, and a tiny bit of magenta. A little more magenta. Okay, so we got a little more yellow. Okay, then I'm going to take a tiny bit of white. Tiny bit more. I'm going to add a little more of this veining, but I'm going to do it with a lighter shade of that dark green. So it's going to be really subtle. So there's that dark green. So I just added some white to it. I'm going to water my brush. Mix some water in there so it's going to be very subtle. And I'm going to, hold on, got too much water on there. Wipe off some of the extra. I'm going to use the very tip of the brush, and I'm just going to do some of that veining. The squiggly lines right over some of those other parts. Just adding some more of that. So it looks like there's more going on than just what we had before. Don't cover up your wave. Just adding some squiggly lines. It's going to be very, very subtle. I just want to add another layer. Let's add a little more white to it. Use the very tip of the brush, and we're just going to do some really skinny little lines. I'm barely pushing down on the canvas, just using the very, very tip of that brush. You don't have to do this part if you don't want. If you liked how it looked, just leave it. I just felt like it needed a little more something in that area. Cleaning off my brush. I'm just using a damp brush to kind of spread out some of this. And when it dries, it's going to be even more subtle Because right now it's very watered down. Let's stand back. Look at that. Have it connect down into this section here a little bit. And put a little more white. I'm just going to do a couple little skinny little details. Just going to hit a few little parts. And by doing this, just like how we added several layers when we were doing the foam down here, I think we did about 4 different shades. We started with the darker, then went a little lighter, a little lighter, a little lighter. It adds so much more depth because you can see all the different shades and all the different layers. Same thing here. We didn't really add any more layers besides that first one. So by adding several more layers, it's going to make it feel deeper. It's going to make that water feel like it has more depth to it. So again, just taking a tiny bit more of the white, using the very tip of the brush. We're just going to add a few little streaky veins here and there, not a lot. The lightest part should be the most subtle. Just like how we did the least amount of the bright white on the waves, because you want it to be a little more special and stand out. Same thing here. Just a few little touches here and there. Those veins. A little more white on there. Little squiggly lines. Tone that back a little bit with a damp brush. And it's going to dry a little darker. It won't stay that bright because we watered it down so much. And by we, I mean me. Alright, so then what I like to do, hold on, a little more. I'm probably going to say, okay, I'm done, about 10 times. And then I'll keep finding other things. Just be prepared. This could go on for hours. Sometimes you just gotta know when to stop. A little more there. Okay. Think I'm done. I don't know. I might have done too much there. I might be going back in and darkening that up in a second. Okay, let's see. My son just texted me. Are you picking me up or am I walking? How's the weather? He's walking. Okay. So I think I'm done, but I'm not quite sure yet, and this is how I'll know. What I like to do at this stage is take a photo of it. Because I've been staring at it so much, there's things I'm probably not noticing. So I always just grab my phone, Oh no, did my phone just die? Crap. Of course, right as I'm getting ready to take a picture. I'm going to skinny up this part a little bit so it's not so fat all of a sudden. So it's a little more of a subtle turn of the white cap of the wave. And then I'm going to add a little more white here, just a little bit, and maybe a tiny bit of shadow, and a little bit of shadow under here with some of the darker green. I'm also going to tone this down. I went too crazy. This got too busy. Now it's standing out too much to me. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of dark green and tone that back. And let's see what else. Yeah, that definitely. And I might even bring a little more of a thin, watered down white, a little more of the foam here to make this a little more foamy. And then we'll check it out. We'll see where we're going to go from there. Okay, so let's start off. We're going to need to mix a little bit of this lighter green color here to trim that down. So let's take our white, just put it on top of there because that's dry. A little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, a little more yellow. Add some white to that. A little more yellow. Let's see. Ooh, that's too bright. Tiny bit of magenta. We've got to tone that down. So see how bright that is? Adding a tiny bit of magenta will mute it down a touch. A little more yellow. Still a little bit bright, but I kind of like that. It's going to add another layer. Let's put a little bit on that side too. And we'll blend that in. Clean off your brush if you got too bright like I did. Dry your brush off really well. And we're just going to kind of blend that right into the rest. Blend that in. We need to cover up a little more of that. Let's take a little more. A little more yellow. A little more blue. A little more yellow. Let's just cover up most of it, and then I can add some more of that white wave if I need to. Some little swipes of that. Let's do a couple little subtle swipes of that color because that's a little bit brighter, but I like it. Let's just swipe a little bit here and there so it looks like the light's popping in some of that bright color. And this is a good tip if you ever have a struggle getting the exact color you were trying to mix. I didn't try very hard to get that exact color because I liked this extra layer, but if you ever do that and you just can't get that exact color and you're touching up a little area like we're doing here, take a little bit of that same color and just touch a few other areas in your painting so it looks consistent. So it doesn't look like you just have this weird random spot of color that doesn't match anything else. You can just do a few little touches other places so it looks like you did pull that in from other areas. Okay, so let's clean our brush. And I'm gonna take a little bit, see if I have any of our dark green left on here. No, I need to make it, gonna make some of that deeper green. Take a little magenta, or a lot, oops. Blue, yellow, more blue, more magenta. Okay, we've got that deep green. I'm going to take a little bit. For this part, you could do, actually, let's finish this first. Focus on one thing at a time. Sorry. I just like to get it all done. Let's take a little white and some yellow. We're going to make a little bit of that kind of medium green shade that we had there. And we're going to put just a little bit right under where the wave is. So we're going to create a little bit of a shadow. It's going to give a lot more depth to this. And we're just going to blend that in with a dry brush. Take a dry brush. Actually, I'm going to take my number 8 filbert brush, if you have that. We didn't really use that the whole time, we didn't need it, but I'm going to use this just to tap it in and blend in this shadow color. And then I'm going to take a little tiny bit of that, and I'm just going to go right under where those little white bits are. And that's going to create a really subtle little shadow. It's going to make that really pop. Those little tiny little bits of the wave that are going to fold over. So blend that little shadow in there. Oops. See, already you can see it's giving a nice shadow effect. Just wiggle your brush around, just kind of fade it out. I got my brush a teeny bit wet because this was so dry it wasn't blending very easily. And just a little bit of paint on your brush and just fade it out. Okay, now let's take a little bit of white, and I'm going to dip down. I'm going to come up a little bit and dip down a little bit just to create just a little extra fold. And you don't need to leave it, so I'm leaving a little bit of that green popping through because it'll make it look like the water's peeking through there. Let's do just a little bit more, a little tiny dip down here and there too. This is very subtle little addition, but sometimes it's the little tiny subtle things that really add a lot to the finished piece. And it's little things that sometimes just make you happy with the painting, just little things that you need to do. I know it would have bugged me later if I didn't do that, so. Okay. And let's add just a teeny bit more of this white here. Little subtle, teeny thin line right there. Okay. That looks a little too perfect. Need one more dip. There you go. Okay, so now we need to do a little more work right here. So we're going to need some of the periwinkle color. Take some white, tiny bit of magenta, a little bit of blue. Mix that off to the side first, and then you can bring the white into it. White. Okay, take your brush, mash it up a little. Really subtle, because we want to keep this skinny and we don't want it to get too fat again. So I want this to really taper in and get a lot skinnier, so I'm just going to tiny little taps. Don't want to get too wide. No, it's not that big of a change, but to me it is. Okay, I'm going to take some white, pure white, and add just a little bit of highlight right there. And again, you don't need to do this. This is just, it was bugging me. I just thought it needed to be skinnier here. It wasn't like it looked horrible before, but it's just a little subtle thing that would have driven me crazy. Do a few little sea sprays popping up here and there. I need more white again. I'm out. Oh wait, there's a little bit. A couple little spots over here. Couple more sprays over there. Okay, I think I know. I'm gonna say I think I'm done, and I'm not gonna be. Okay. Okay. Almost okay. Alrighty. Okay, clean off that brush, and we're gonna add, let's go ahead and add some of that white down there before we do the darker green. And I'm taking my angular brush again, this one, water it down a little bit, and just put a little bit of white, very thin, watered down white. And I'm just gonna do that same thing we did before, if you remember. And again, you don't have to do this. If you're happy with yours, leave it. I just want to tone down a little bit and add just a little more of this white foam, but it's watered down, so it's not pure white. Put this on the edge here. To me, there's just a little too much of this contrast with these green holes popping through here. Just want a little more of that covered up. A thin layer of watered down white. Okay, I think I like that better. Now we're going to tone this down. So you can use your glazing medium now, or you can use white. If you don't have glazing medium, that's okay. This is what the glazing medium looks like, and it's just a thick, clear liquid. Then let's see. Let's fold over a little section so you can see this. See, it's just it looks white, but it dries clear. Now when you mix in this glazing medium with your paint, you can use as much of the glazing medium as you want, and it's not going to affect it. If you're using water, if you do too much water, you can get drips, and it can start to wipe off some of your layer below. So since this is pretty dry, but it's not completely dry because we just painted it not too long ago, I'm going to use the glazing medium. But again, just use the, if you don't have this, use the water, it'll be fine. So we're going to take some of that dark green that I mixed up. Hopefully they're still, oh good, it's not completely dry. I'm going to dip some of that glazing medium in there, and I'm just going to go right over the top of all of this. And this is just going to tone it back a little bit. I need to make more of the green because I didn't do enough. I'm going to mix some more of that. Some green, some magenta. Make a deep dark green. Let's see, how's that? Yeah, that's pretty good. Put the glazing medium in there. Put a little more yellow. And we're just going to brush right over just this little darker section here. I'm just going to lightly, I don't want to work it too much because the paint's not that dry. I don't want to start to lift anything. That's going to be a little better for me. Again, if you, I don't even know if you added your extra veining. If you did, and yours got a little too bright too, you can do this same thing. If you're happy with what you got, just leave it. I'm just very anal, and I know that if I don't fix it, it's really going to bug me later. And again, don't come down where this flat part is, because this is the shadow. You can go a little bit underneath the wave. Tone that down so there's a little more of a shadow there. That will be great. But then keep this bright, because that's where the sun's hitting the top of it. Okay, let's take a picture. Let's check that. Actually, let me add a little more of this. I'm going to add a little bit of this green here just to add a little more shadow. Just use my finger and a little bit above there too, just to make that wave stand out. Okay. Wait a minute, I see something else. Hold on. See, it takes a while. That last finishing stage, there's always so many little things you can add. I'm going to take my number 8 filbert, and I'm going to take a little bit of that darker green, and I'm going to just add a little subtle bit of darkness. Try not to get it on the white part of the waves, but I'm just going to add a little shadow around those edges, just to make those white parts of the waves pop even more. So I'm going just a little bit darker right along this edge here, and just blend it up. Up. Now it's a little too textury, so I'm washing my brush off, and just with a clean damp brush I'm just going to sort of fade it out, blend it in. I don't want to mess up my wave. Alright, let's take a picture. Okay, and take a look at that. This way you can zoom in on parts and analyze it. It's always hard. People say, how do you know when your painting's done? Well, it's done when you can live with it and not critique every little detail of it. If it's hanging on your wall and you're sitting in front of it, you don't want to be annoyed by it and staring at every little part that drives you crazy. So that's when it's done, when it stops bugging you. Okay, this is bugging me. this little section here, it's just a little too straight. I want to see a little more of the spray right on the edge. So I'm going to take my roughed up brush, make sure it's really dry. I'm going to dip it in the white, smash my brush up, and get a little more, but not too much because I don't want it to get fat again. Just needs a little bit more splash, just a tiny bit. Okay, that did it for me. That's good. Maybe a little more there. And I'm going to brighten up a little bit of these whites that I smeared some green into. Okay, am I done? Let's see. Let me stand back and look at it. I think I am, wait, one more little thing. I am so picky. A little tiny bit more of the ocean spray here. It got covered up when I did that dark green. Just a couple more little sprays. Very subtle white. Maybe a couple more little dots of white here because those got toned down. And I added more white foam. I should probably be using my tiny brush for this, but that's okay. Okay, now I think, wait, hold on, oh my gosh, it's never gonna end. I could do this forever, sorry. I don't want to, it just happens. I have no control, my hand just does it. A little more there. Something there. Okay. Okay, really think I've done this time. Let's take one last picture. And check that out. Let's see. All right, last step, sign your painting. And then on each of my paintings, I have a little signature thing that I do. I always add 2 ladybugs to the sides of each of my paintings. They're always in a different place. They represent my 2 kids. So my kids are with me on all my artwork. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you did complete this tutorial, I would love, 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 love to see your paintings. So tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Debbie Avoux Studio. I hope you have a great day and we'll see you next time. Bye.